Hi, my name is Sofiya Cheyenne. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an access consultant on Freak the Mighty.
My name is Talleri McRae. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an access consultant on Freak the Mighty. I became involved in Freak the Mighty because I am the access consultant at La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego. I also work with a handful of other theaters around the country. And just about 3 years ago, I was visiting for one of my visits on site at La Jolla Playhouse, and my visit overlapped with the Junkyard Dogs. And they were telling me about a really exciting new project that they were just getting started on. And they were wondering if I was interested in offering some access consulting as they were getting the project up off of its feet. So they told me about the title Freak the Mighty, which was a new title for me. And I went and did some searching. I found the original novel from 1993. I found the film version from a few years later. And in our next conversation, we were talking about particular people that we thought would bring a lot to this story and this process. And I mentioned my dear friend and colleague, Sofiya Cheyenne.
And that's where I come in. So something I didn't mention before is that I am a person with dwarfism. I have a rare form of dwarfism called spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia congenital, which, if you translate that into layman's terms, it essentially means that my bones grow differently than average sized people. And as a performer, as an actor, uh, and as an artist, I have always brought my dwarfism to every project that I've been in. So being a consultant is a new hat that I'm wearing, but graciously in this project has been a joy. And it's really a full circle moment for me because when Talleri and I knew each other from other projects, but when she asked me about Freak the Mighty, I was very familiar with this story, as most little people are, little people meaning people with dwarfism. You might hear me say all sorts of different descriptors as I'm sharing about myself. But for the dwarfism community, for the short statured community, especially if you grew up in the 90s, you might have intersected with this story. So it's a full circle moment for me because I knew the book as a child, I knew the movie, and didn't really have a great relationship with the story. And then when I met my now husband, who told me that he actually auditioned for the role for the movie, I just I knew this story very well. So when Tallery told me about it, I was super excited to kind of bring that authentic experience into the process and how great it would be to have a person with dwarfism on the team. So that brings me here. The original book did have some language that, like, today could be harmful. And so we just really went right to the hard stuff in the beginning and talked about words and language a lot. So specifically thinking about the word freak, for example, which is in the title of the show, there's a historical context of freak is loaded, especially for people with disabilities and people with dwarfism all across those communities. And so we had a lot of conversations internally in the beginning. And now that the show has become a show and audiences will see it, we've also talked about those things with external communications as well. And just making sure that people understood that, not all people embrace that word, that it's still a word that can be triggering for people, but that disabled people have been considered freaks since the beginning of time, um, and there's different connotations that come with that word, but specifically teaching the creative team and those that have been involved that, like, since the early 19th, 20th centuries, when you had the sideshow and the freak show era, that was probably the most exploitative and objective time for people with disabilities, oddities, curiosities, freaks, whatever you want to call it. Um, and that was a really hard time for people. And that's still a ripple effect today in society. And still today, people treat little people like myself or people like dwarfism, people that have dwarfism in objectifying ways. I I connect it to that time, where there were freak shows and the word freak was used, or the word um, trigger warning, midget was used. And these are objectifying words for a community, although some people embrace them as well. So the point is that as we've taught this creative team how to tell this story today, by acknowledging the original content, you know, acknowledging that like that was a time where words were harmful, and words can still be harmful today, but how can we still bring this harm in without completely taking our audiences out and feeling like super triggered? And so we've worked really, really hard to make sure that we've thought of every single word as intentional as it can be. And that even comes down to like when the words are used, the tone they're set in, and the lights and the movement and this, the plot, all of it at the same time. Like, how are all of those things being intentionally thought through as we're putting this story out on the stage? And so there's two things that I just want to leave anyone who's listening with, that we've put on these lovely lobby boards at Cleveland Playhouse. But we will continue to say as we're part of this project that one, the word freak is embraced by the character Kevin, and he has reclaimed it in a positive way as a positive identifier for himself in this story. And two, that you should just not use the word freak to describe anyone without explicit permission. And that's it, um and that's kind of like a general rule, I'd say, for many disabled people. And when you are an ally in space with disabled people, that like we are not a monolith. We don't all feel the same way about language and words. We all have our individual experiences, how we grew up, where we grew up, who raised us, to really complete how we identify within the community. And so yeah, it's hard to tell this story today because there is a lot in the original content that could be triggering, but it's also really important to kind of name that time has changed, and we have come a long way. So yeah, so we've really taken that piece of like telling a story from the 90s and showing it today, keeping it in the 90s as a show, and still finding ways to teach people the right language to use. And it's very tricky.
And one thing that I really appreciate about this Access team and about Sofiya's input in particular is that Sofiya can make a room feel so comfortable and supportive that people feel comfortable asking the question they were nervous to ask and admitting that they're curious about something that they might not have said they were curious about. And to me, that's where the really good conversations can come from in disability and difference. And that also shows up in the play. Max is one of the few people in the world who's not afraid to be curious about Kevin in a way and ask him really deep questions. And in the same way, Kevin is curious about Max and Max's experience. So I think without knowing it, the Access team may have replicated a little bit of that curiosity in building those conversations about disability, difference, dwarfism, trauma, all of those pieces that we just don't have a lot of practice talking about in society in general. One of the beautiful things about Max and Kevin's friendship in this story is that they see each other differently than the rest of the world sees them. That oftentimes the world does see people with disabilities as a label. People do see people with a history of mental health or a history of trauma in a certain way and in a certain light. And yet, when Max and Kevin see each other, they don't see only their disability identities. They see all of their qualities and nuances, their thoughtfulness, their curiosity, their quirks, their annoying qualities with each other, right? And they have the ability as good friends to see each other as fully human, nuanced, good, bad, and everything in between, which for me is really exciting because that makes a really good character and a really good story. When you reduce someone to a disability and you kind of flatten out their experience, it's not only harmful because that's representing a specific community or communities. In my opinion, it's also just not as an exciting way to tell a story or learn about a person or people.
The music is beautiful and it's super exciting because what what we've done and what this story does, I mean, the original content and this musical is doing is that we're seeing we're humanizing these two people instead of dehumanizing them, which happens a lot in the disability space. Or sometimes, when we're looking at art and media and Hollywood and the history of disabled characters in art, a lot of times they're only, for these two particular characters, only seen for their size. That's a big guy, that's a little guy, and that's it. And they're not seen for anything else. And so the difference is what this story does is that the friendship, they see each other for more than their size. They're seeing the humans that they are and the fun, bubbly and or quiet, teenage boys that like everyone can relate to. So we're really like debunking those assumptions about disability, about size, about intelligence, about like special ed class or all of these things. And it's their friendship that starts to like knock down all these assumptions that the world has made about them. And that is a strong friendship. Like everybody wants a friendship like that, you know? And I think that a lot of disabled folks that come to the show will hopefully will remember or reminisce about a friend like that in their life. We've probably all had a friend like that that didn't have the same lived experience as us, but we saw each other's humanity first. And so that's what I see the music doing and this story doing and this friendship and why the friendship is the center of the entire story. And that is what transforms the community around them and hopefully the audiences I watch.
I hope audiences take away so much disabled joy and disabled creativity and innovation and community and culture. And as someone who has a disability and is average height, I have been learning so much specifically about the culture of dwarfism and little people and people of short stature, and the relationship that that culture has with the broader disability community, ways in which we've supported each other, and ways in which we still have a lot of work to go, right? Ways to go to understand each other and be good allies for each other within different disability communities, right? How we can support each other. So I hope that whether or not you have a disability, whether or not you're a little person or your average height, you walk away with a whole bunch of joy.